But now, on to our speaker. And I'm such a fangirl, I don't even know where to start with Anne Ortelee, but we are absolutely delighted to welcome her this evening. She is what she calls a predictive astrologer. She lives in New York City, and in addition to consulting for her clients, she teaches, she writes, she lectures. She's certified by the 3 major astrology organizations in the United States, as well as the International Society for Astrological Research. And currently, she serves as a director for the Carl Gustav Jung Foundation in New York City and as the treasurer for the Organization for Professional Astrologers. She's a regular contributor to Astrology Hub, where she broadcasts predictive updates week by week. And she also holds separate weekly podcasts entitled Anne Ortelee's Weekly Weather. Her talk tonight is entitled The Winter Eclipses, the Saturn and Uranus Squares of 2021. Anne Ortelee, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pamela. Okay, so we're going to talk about the eclipses, and then we're going to have you do a little history. So hopefully, you can get a copy of your chart so as we go through the Saturn-Uranus section, so you can kind of see where it's going to affect your chart. And one of the things that we know that eclipses really are very prominent in helping us see things or understand things and how we're supposed to work with them. So this is a lecture by me for the Aquarius Severn Astrology on Thursday, November 5th, 2020. All right, so the winter eclipses ahead come. Now we had pretty potent ones in the summer, but I kind of wanted to put them in because they were so big. One of them was right after a Venus star point on June 5th. The next one was on the world axis on June 21st. And then the last one was on July 5th on the US sun, because our birthday for the aspirational chart of the Declaration of Independence is July 4th, 1776. So we had a lot of eclipses. Of course, the world point, we know that the Saturn-Pluto conjunction was at 22.5. That's a world point. It's a global pandemic. And Andre Barbeau predicted it in 2001. He said, big global pandemic, big economic shutdown, Capricorn, Saturn, Pluto meeting on a world point, and also economics. Capricorn rules business, money, and how societies are structured and functioning. So in a couple days, we have another big aspect, the Jupiter-Pluto meeting again at 22 Capricorn, emphasizing that story of this reorganization and the restructuring that we're going to have, what we've had. And now, of course, we go, now what are we going to do about it? Now, whenever there's a pandemic, we know afterwards there's a renaissance. So there's an incoming energy of creativity, an incoming energy of change. And of course, totally appropriate that we're having this on Guy Fawkes Day, and we're having explosions behind you because Saturn Uranus is a little explosive and a little, kind of structural energy, Saturn Uranus wanting to change. So what we're going to do is kind of talk about that, and also so you can look at where the Renaissance is going to be in your chart when we get to the charts, but we're also going to kind of work through that energy. So we had those eclipses in the spring, summer. Go look at them. There also was a Sun-Venus conjunction on the 3rd of June, right next to the eclipse on the 5th of June. And of course, whenever Sun and Venus meet up, they start a new 8-year cycle at 13 Gemini. So if you go back in 4-year increments, because the inferior, or I like to think of it as interior conjunction, was on June 3rd, and then the superior is, which is on the far side of the sun, is on every 4 years later. So if you think in your chart, 13 degrees Gemini, where is this new cycle starting? June of this year, go back in 4-year increments, June of 16, June of 12, June of 8, June of 4, June of 2000. There's a whole new way of thinking, Gemini, communicating, Gemini, and loving or partnering and communicating. So those eclipses kind of set the key for the eclipses coming. And of course, I like to, the way I was taught by my astrology teacher, we know they're all different Saros cycles, which is the cycle of how the eclipses run, but they also seem to run in pairs. So whatever opened up for you in June, or actually whatever opened up in December last year when Harry and Meghan quit, it closed up in June. That's when they moved to the States. it now closes up. The June eclipses now close up again, right? So we have this cycle of shift. And of course, they just announced that Meghan, as a royal, voted in the states here for the election. So we're going to see the stories kind of unfold. So when we look at the eclipse chart, everybody I talked to said use the January 1st, 1801 Westminster as opposed to the 1066. And I'm kind of like, okay, I like the 1801. So this is the generally accepted chart for the United Kingdom. And so we see that this, of course, the Saturn Pluto, and you probably had this with other lectures, the Saturn Pluto is up here on the Vesta, the home and hearth, affecting the home and hearth. And of course the angles are 24. So they're getting that energy of the transit. And of course the moon of Britain, the United Kingdom is 25. So you're in the crosshairs with this because you're cardinal cross. I like turning on the asteroids because I find they really speak to the feminine energy. Otherwise, there's only two women, the moon and Venus. So Vesta, of course, is the home and hearth, what we feel secure, how we feel safe, what we feel important about, what makes us feel safe. So this generally tends to be, as I understand it, the accepted chart. So we know that that pandemic is big on your chart. And of course, it made world news when Boris Johnson got COVID, and then apparently just this last week with the Mars Mercury retrograde aspecting these points, apparently Prince William had a pretty bad case, which they didn't tell you. But of course, Mercury retrograde, the secrets come out, right? So the eclipse that we're going to have cast for London on November 30th is a lunar eclipse. It's a full moon eclipse. So when we look at that energy, the moon and the sun are at 8 degrees of Gemini. And of course, they're right back next to the Sun-Venus conjunction point. The eclipse that happened in June was at 15 Gemini. So they're kind of on the midpoint of that eclipse, but they're laying across your 5th house and your 11th house. So they're speaking to a lot of things. Cast in the UK at 9:30 in the morning. It is an anaretic degree rising. Last degree of Gemini rising, or Sagittarius rising, of course, marks the end or the beginning of a new cycle whenever we're at the anaretic degrees. And of course, that's right on the world point. One more minute, 4 more minutes later, it's 0 Capricorn. So we're seeing world events happening in the UK with this full moon eclipse. And of course, it's the house of the public, and it's the house of the children of the country. It's the house of transformation in terms of what we're going to do creatively and how we're going to do it. We also see the Venus-Uranus is angular in this eclipse. It's in your 10th house. So we just had Uranus on the full moon that we just had, which was an earthquake in Wachahuzzi in Turkey. So we know this Uranus-Venus stuff, so it suggests a little bit of an earthquake or an explosion or some kind of change. And of course, full moons are always emotional. So we go back and we say, okay, so what's really happening? Now, back when January happened and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction happened on, that eclipse happened on your angles in January of this year. That was Harry and Meghan quitting and leaving. And of course, the word that was given was, the public word is that, well, they have a year to figure it out, right? And of course, the Queen is running her cycle, her moon cycle from 84 to 96. So when she was young, her uncle abdicated and thus she became the Queen. And now her grandson is leaving for a divorcee from the United States. Different story, but same kind of theme. And, she kind of emotionally had to work through that. So we can see this moon Uranus kind of indicating a separation. And again, I don't really know how you guys do your astrology there if you think of the Queen as the 10th house, but it does suggest a structural change in your country, in how your government is working, in the direction. And of course, because you're high on the earth, I use Placidus. I know a number of people over there use Coke, but Placidus places these planets of the transformation that this Saturn-Uranus has, this COVID, I call it the COVID clump, has brought us. It puts it in your 1st house. Now, what's going to happen in a couple of days is Jupiter and Pluto are meeting up right? And they're meeting up at 22.5, right on that conjunction from January, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which of course is a 38-year cycle. Last time we had it was in 1982, November of 82, and it kind of opened up and then we wrapped up. And I kind of made the analogy of this the other day with somebody, and they thought it was helpful. You know, it's kind of like Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, and Athena have been having a cocktail party all year. And Saturn's gone out and gotten in the car, and he's warming it up. And Jupiter's kind of running around the party and saying goodbye right now. And then he says goodbye to Pluto. And Saturn and Pluto know they're not going to see each other for 38 years. Jupiter and Pluto are saying goodbye for 13. And then on December 21st, Saturn and Jupiter are going to get married and run off to be in Aquarius land for 20 years, right? So we know there's this big cycle happening. And, you know, back, 250 years ago, when we had the sun never set on the British Empire, and we had the American Revolution, and we had, you know, kind of a shifting in your structures. Now, you know, I kind of think of it as Brexit is, you know, you're leaving some of your structures behind. You're stepping out of that and stepping back into your own authority, which kind of suggests this energy, but also that we know with the Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, that the last time we had that was the Protestant Reformation in Capricorn. It happens in other signs, but the last time we had that was the Protestant Reformation and Martin Luther hammering the theses on his church wall and saying the government and the church is corrupt. And at that point, it was kind of a global government. All the governments reported to the church. And of course, Capricorn rules corporations. So we're looking at how corporations and governments negotiate with each other, because multinational corporations are similar, I think, in Capricorn land to being the authority that kind of runs things. So we're seeing a shift. We also know that the last time that Jupiter and Saturn met up in air was 800 years ago, back in the 1215 time frame. They met in Libra, then they had another Earth, and then they went into air for 200 years. So Saturn and Jupiter are meeting up in Aquarius on December 22nd on the equinox. And they're going to be saying, okay, now we have to learn to think differently, because back then in the Magna Carta was signed, which was the beginning of the jurisprudence for, you know, the law systems in England and the States, and really copied by many, many people. The habeas corpus produced the body. We don't have to report to a king anymore. We got one here in the United States. Trying to get rid of them. We'll see what happens. But this is also a new way of thinking. We haven't had Saturn and Jupiter meet in air. They meet in air for 200 years. So we're at this threshold of really restructuring our lives and figuring out what's important, and then figuring out how we're going to think differently. So we see that this is a really important chart for you guys because of the anaretic degree, but also just think that right there is 0 Capricorn, which is a world degree. And then, of course, the Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto all meeting at 22.5, which is another cardinal degree, another world point. And we also know the other signs are 7.5. So the sun is at 8.5, 7.5 of the mutable, and 15 of the fixed. So we're really feeling a lot of energy around, okay, like almost not, I don't want to call it unstable, but I'm going to call it changing. And then down here, as Mars, who is in charge of the direction of the country and in charge of the hopes and dreams of the country, ruling Venus, ruling Juno, which is a partnership planet, ruling Mercury and how we communicate, as well as the third house of how we think. Mars is going to come through and square these guys one more time, but he is, over the next few months, he is suggesting it's time for us to think about things. Now, when we apply this eclipse chart to the UK, we look and we say, gee, you know, we see this Capricorn stuff all up here at the COVID clump at the top of the chart, suggesting the direction, the leaders of the country, the places where you're heading are all going to be shifting, and you're going to be coming up with a new version of what you want. And with Mars working behind the scenes in the 12th house, he is very close to the node of the UK. He would have gone over it a couple days ago. Or he would have gone over it in July. And now as he goes back to 15 and he stops right next to it next week, and then he scooches forward, he's not going to necessarily re-trigger the node, but he is going to bring in mind for people what was happening in July when Mars hit 13 and what the direction. And then, of course, he's going to go forward and he's going to clip the angles again as he comes to square the Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn one more time. Now, he is going to square Pluto in Cardinal, but he's going to square Jupiter and Saturn next January in Taurus, or in Aquarius rather, because they're going to move into Aquarius and he's going to move into Taurus, and they're going to have that square. We also see here that the transiting Uranus is trine the sun. There's a lot of energy of, you know, how we move forward and what we do. And then we see that the eclipse lands in the house of the second house of what's of value and the eighth house of economic things and transformations, taxes, tax structures. We see Mercury here, the node of fate coming to Mercury. So the eclipses, even though they're not on the Mercury, they're going to pulse an energy in and say, well, understand how you're going to realign this. And of course, the eclipse that we had in June was at 15 on the midpoint of the Juno Mercury energy. So there's a lot of energy about how we partner Juno with our ideas, Mercury and Sag to be out in the world and communicating what's important to us. So big time. And of course, whenever we see the South Node go across a planet in a chart, we know there's some kind of big transformation that happens. In this case, of course, it's in the sixth house of the country. Mercury rules the sixth house of the country, and Mercury rules the country's finances and what's of value to it and how it communicates. So of course, we're looking at a global pandemic. We can anticipate this eclipse gives some transitional energy in that. Plus we see all these energies in the 12th house, which also is the house of hospitals. So this would suggest that the series on the Pluto, you know, the maternal nature of your country in terms of how it nurtures people is going to be coming up. And also we can probably anticipate that there will be a baby announcement, a series Pluto. You know, there's rumors here in the States that Meghan's pregnant, you know, because she postponed her case and her suing the tabloids. But you know, there's a lot of stuff kind of looking in Harry's and Meghan's chart that there might be another baby in there. So we see this energy kind of coming up for the eclipse as it lands. Now, of course, you live in a country, so your chart, one of my favorite British astrologers said to me one time, how does your chart relate to New York cities? And I was kind of a baby astrologer at the time, and I'm like, I don't know, let me go look. So I looked up my chart, and I have like 23 points of contact, my chart to New York's, right? So you all live there, or you live somewhere else, and you're tuning in to Britain right now. But you all have connections to this chart. And then you also want to look at where the eclipse is going to land in your chart. Also, go back 19 years. Go back to 2001. This is the eclipse that followed 9/11, right? Go back to 1982. That was the Iran-Contra. Go back to 83. That was the Kennedy assassination in the States. And so we know that these eclipses that we had in June that are on world, and go back 19 years before that, we have D-Day. We know that these eclipses that we have on these world points are big deals because the whole world stops and looks and goes, wow, what's going on? So there's a lot of energy here with this eclipse. The next one is the solar eclipse that happens on December 14th. At that point, both Saturn and Jupiter are at the very last degrees of Capricorn, right? So they're about to shift into Aquarius. We also see the focus on the sun and the moon at 23 Sag, next to Mercury, near the South Node. Of course, that's what we know. Eclipses are the lights taking place near the South Node. This one's a tight one, so it's called a total eclipse. It's a total eclipse of the sun. We can see this juicy finger of God here. I always find fingers of God really fated events happen. And in the UK, this chart is right on the world point. So you guys are going to be in the news. We're all going to be paying attention to you on the December 14th eclipse, whatever that is, because this eclipse is smack dab on your ascendant. Or it's smack dab on your world point. And then when we apply it to the natal chart, you'll see how it works. Now, it is a bowl chart suggesting a partnering energy, or when planets are all clustered on one side of the chart, the empty section, of course, looks to be filled in. So it does look to have somebody step in, but with the ascendant on a world point, and the energy that it's talking to here is Venus in Scorpio, Juno in Sag. We also see it talking to the COVID clump getting ready to leave. Saturn's leaving Capricorn for 29 years. Jupiter's leaving for 12 years. They're going to get married in a week. You know, it's a big shift in structure, you know, a big shift in the direction, a big shift in how we get there and what we do, what's next. When we apply it to the British chart, the UK chart, we can see that Mars is getting closer to the angles, and we see that there's a lot of energy here in the 9th house, which is foreign places, faraway places. So faraway energies with the sun up there, education stuff, philosophy stuff, foreign engagements, and how we're going to do it, what we're going to proceed. Of course, it's on a south node, leaving behind. You just had your Mercury return a day or two before. You know, contractual stuff around how we're financing and how we're working. So I know one of the things that I've totally not very informed about it, but I know it like that much. The Brexit is like, what are the trade negotiations? How are we going to do those? So that really does kind of focus on that. And then we see that Pluto is sitting right on Vesta, which suggests some really fundamental changes in the structure of the country. And of course, you are having a Pluto transit. You know, you're having Pluto here squaring the angles, right? So even though this is from 1801, you know, in 1776, we got a divorce, you know, we said bye. So you've got some energy about separating, figuring out new structures, changing the structure of where you're going. Natally, you have Eris, the goddess of discord, in Capricorn. Now, she's kind of new. She hasn't been around much. We discovered her, I mean, she's been around a long time. We didn't know about her until 2005. And one of the things that she does, you know, in mythology, Mike Brown has been naming planets after goddesses, except he's picking mean ones. And so Eris is Mars' sister, Aries' sister, and she sows discord. So she wasn't invited to the wedding where the young woman had to marry the old guy who didn't get to marry who she wanted, threw the apple in, said it's for the most beautiful goddess. There was this whole big fight. Paris awarded it for love, and the other two went off and they started the Trojan War, right? So we know Eris is a little contentious. So you're having Saturn here, on your Eris. And it went over it in April, it went over it June 30th. So we can anticipate some contention. And then Jupiter is going to go right over it. And of course, this is the house of groups, the house of hopes and dreams. And of course, here we are having this presentation with fireworks going outside when you're trying to burn down the parliament way back when. So, you know, astrology works no matter when, right? So the Saturn here on the Eris is very much about looking at where everybody's mad and angry and really feeling things. And we also see Eris, she moves very slowly. She takes 500 years to go around the circle. But you can see she's coming into the ascendant of the UK chart. So you're going to be entering an angry phase where you're going to be going, okay, I'm not real happy about that. Now, I've been watching Eris a lot because I like her. She's in my chart. She fills out my T-square. I'm a Capricorn. I'm a 1954 model. So I have a lot of planets at 22 of the cardinal, and she fills it out. So I like Nancy Pelosi, I like AOC, I like Eris women, I like Eris men, as long as they like women, because sometimes they don't really like women, but sometimes they really like strong women. So you're about to have Eris go across the ascendant and really see some strength come in to the country, and this eclipse kind of a harbinger of it. And also as Eris comes across the ascendant, and she's going to be squaring Pluto, which she did two times already this year. And she will do it again in a couple of weeks on the 13th. And then she'll do it twice next year, one in April, one in October. Now, I've been watching the Eris-Pluto square, and it tends to be a contentious time. In the States, it was correlated to the first impeachment and also when Kobe Bryant died. in the plane crash, and he had an Eris Pluto opposition. So he was known as being pretty aggressive on the basketball court, and the square was exact the day he died, right? And then, so I'm watching her when she meets up again with Pluto in June, and we had John Bolton's book came out about the conspiracy, you know, about the Ukraine business. And then he said, but the Democrats were doing a crappy job, so I didn't want to talk about it. But that was also when Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested. So Eris Pluto seems to be some kind of angry energy with the feminine against Pluto abuse of power, right? Or how we use our power. And so I'm watching for her because she meets up on the 13th of November, and then she meets up in April and June next year. And when Eris and Pluto, when Eris was playing with Uranus a couple years ago, we had Hillary running, breaking the glass ceiling, and we had Donald Trump running. And we know which one we got. And he's certainly been an Eris-Uranus kind of guy. Eris is, and Uranus is kind of, you know, you wake up every morning and you don't know what he's done, right? So now that Eris and Pluto are having this fight on November 13th, we'll see, you know, what happens with this energy, but it's pretty potent. But more importantly for you guys, it's coming to your ascendant next year. So you're going to watch the contention, especially around the group energy, because the 11th house is groups, kick up a little and kind of have that, okay, how do we use this? What do we do with it? Because the sun and the moon in the eclipse, we always look at what they rule. The moon rules the foundation of your country. The moon rules the children of your country. It rules your understanding of your family nature, the moon here. And then the sun rules, of course, your children and your work, as well as your Saturn and Leo, which is, you know, the whole concept of being a good king, you know, which you have. Saturn and Leo is, we want to be creative, we want to be a good king. And so this energy of this eclipse with the sun and moon trining Saturn is like, how do we be a good king to ourselves? Because the Saturn and Pluto, at least the feature I've really seen, Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, has been, you have to be your own authority because the regular authorities aren't necessarily showing up for you the way you want. Of course, in our country, we're having it on our Pluto. We're having our Pluto return. But that also means that that was when we got divorced last time, you know, when we, because this chart is obviously a continuation of the 1060s. They're all related, right? This is the most recent version of you guys. So when we see this eclipse, we see how potent it is in terms of the direction and also the Saturn Pluto taking place in the house of hopes and dreams. And of course, whenever planets meet up, we start a new cycle. So we know we have all this energy of beginning as we face the endings of the Saturn ruling the 10th house, the leadership. Saturn, the 11th house is the groups. So that can also be something, you know, with your government or your authority figures in the government undergoing some structural changes. And obviously that is part of, you know, your whole negotiation with Brexit, but also just, I think in general, as we come out of this pandemic, one of the things that happens is nobody's, I mean, at least not in the States, they haven't really been talking about the economic impact that it's had. And so that's also, you know, for us, it's in our second house of money. So I keep going, we aren't talking about the money, but you guys, it's in your house of direction in life and leadership role and how you get there. And to your credit, I've been really, I have a friend who works at NIH, and I've been going, okay, so where's the best vaccine? He goes, the British have the best vaccine. I'm like, all right, I'm going to come to England and get a vaccine if they don't bring it here. So you guys are developing things that are going to help the world, help the community, help the, you know, help everybody get better. And it may be a very big global positioning because this new eclipse here, the sun and the moon, is sextile to the Pluto, is semi-sextile to the Pluto. And obviously some people aren't going to want to take vaccines, but if people want to, the best one is the British one. And the Germans are second. That's what they tell me in the NIH. So it's important, but also Saturn here on Eris, watching for the community dissension. And you should already know what it is, because Saturn went over Eris in April, and he went over it in June. When he went into Aquarius April 1st through June 30th, and then he went back into Capricorn. So you should already know the dissension, that the space is or how it's shifting. And of course, that structural change is important. We also know when Saturn and Jupiter meet up that we have an opportunity for the process to move forward in a new way in terms of leadership and structures. And of course, it's leaving Capricorn, where it's been for 29 years, going into Aquarius with an idea of, okay, what does this new thing look like? And then somebody said to me something about the Saturn in Aquarius, and the last time it was there, back in 92, 93, really was a big economic reshaping of the airline industry. And of course, Saturn in Aquarius, if you have to quarantine, you know, for 2 weeks, and then you go on vacation for a week, and then you come home and you quarantine for a week, it really kind of screws up air travel, right? So we do anticipate with Saturn in Aquarius, there'll be some air difficulties, but a very potent chart. And of course, the placements are very similar because it's only 2 weeks later in terms of where the outer planets are. But we do see this focus on the family and the children, and in the chart before it, we see the focus on the second and the 8th house, you know, how we structure things. So, and the eclipse, you know, because it's a solar eclipse, it takes place, it goes across this part of the world. So we always watch where it goes. A few years back, you guys had a big eclipse that came across you in 99, I think it was 99. I don't remember when it was, but it was a Taurus, it was an eclipse with Taurus. And that was when we had mad cow disease, and it came in from Ireland and kind of spread through the UK into France. And, you know, obviously been there for a while, but we became aware of it. And so this one I'm looking at and I'm thinking, okay, Argentina, Brazil, but also the Antarctica, because we know this is going to be a hot spot. A few years back when the Falkland Islands, when Margaret Thatcher was running the place, there was an eclipse down there on the Falkland Islands. And that was when I was first learning eclipses. And Chris McRae, who's a great astrologer in Canada, said, yes, and I have a map in my living room where I look where the eclipses are and I watch the events, and it was a war in the Falkland Islands. And I was like, I didn't even know there were Falkland Islands, but the eclipse was there. So this is where you're going to be called. And of course, I don't know when the Falkland Islands thing was, but I'm going to guess it's probably a repeat of that cycle because it's kind of going through there. And you do have some kind of foreign engagement with the moon and Sag, moon and sun in Sag in the foreign house. All right, that's a pause. Breathe deeply. Any questions on the eclipse so far that you want to ask? Anything you saw Pamela in there that looked interesting? Any eclipse questions before we go into the Saturn-Uranus cycle?
No, I think we can move on. We're chatting away in the chat box. We're talking about the chart that you're using. We're talking about the UK. It's lovely for us to have such focus on the UK. It's
well, you know, it's a UK presentation. So I wrote like 3 UK astrologers, and I'm like, okay, which chart do you guys use? Because Nick Campion's got like a whole bunch in his book, and I'm like, I'm going to go talk to them. Which one do they like? You know? So.
Yeah, no, this is great. And yeah, please, you know, if anyone does have any questions, do put them in the chat box.
Yeah, well, it's just if there was a question on it, because now we'll go into Saturn Uranus. Okay, sure. Good.
But
all right.
Just to encourage people to write questions in the chat box because we can go back. Thanks,
yeah.
Anne.
Okay, off we go. Okay, so this is a predictive approach that I use from Bernadette Brady, and I find it really helpful. And I want you to get your natal chart out and have it on the desk next to you. Which I should have said in the email, but whatever. And this is a simplified version for a PowerPoint presentation. Hers is much better. It's the Eagle and the Lark, a predictive handbook. But we're going to look at going to do a little higher version of it. She does much more depth, so I encourage you to get the book. But basically, I want you to find the natal, remember what we're going to talk about now is Saturn and Uranus. So I want you to find the natal placement of the planets by sign and house. So first find where your Saturn is. What sign is it in? What house is it in? And then find your Uranus. What sign is it in? What house is it in? Everybody got that? Then you want to note if Saturn and Uranus talk in your chart. Do they have any kind of aspect? And if so, what kind? Just kind of scribble that on the side. Because that's going to describe their dynamic. And whenever Saturn and Uranus do something in the sky, if your planets talk to each other, they're going to do something. If your planets don't talk to each other, they're still going to have a reaction, but they're not necessarily going to kick up. So if you have a trine, you may find, oh, gee, yeah, whenever that matches, that works. Yeah, that totally works. Or if it's a square, you go, oh, you know, whenever anything happens, they get me, you know, because it's a square and I always have to take some kind of action or do something. I'm never allowed to sit around and eat bonbons. So note if they have an aspect. Then I want you to find out which houses are ruled by each planet. Now, traditionally, Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius. And then, of course, Uranus got discovered in the 1700s, and we gave him Aquarius. But so you want to look for the Capricorn houses in your chart and the Aquarius houses. And remember, if you have a house cusp that has 10 Capricorn, 10 degrees are in the house before it. So let's say your 11th house is 10 Capricorn. You've got 10 degrees of Capricorn in 11, and you got 20 degrees of Capricorn in the 12th. So we're going to say 11 and 12. And then that would make your ascendant be Aquarius. So you'd have 12th house and first house. So you want to find the Saturn and the Aquarius houses in your chart and kind of go out if they need to go into different houses because they're on the cusp rulers. Then we're going to talk about where the planets are transiting. This is what we're going to do in the bulk of the presentation. And we're going to observe the aspect type that they have to see the interaction and tell the story. And again, simplified approach. I shouldn't probably even say it's Bernadette Brady because it's like hers is much deeper. Go get the book. But basically, natal placement, sign and house, and what houses they rule, Aquarius, Capricorn. Now, we happen to know that Saturn is in the Capricorn house right now. Like he's been in there and he's going into Aquarius pretty soon. So we know you're having a transit through that house. You've been having it all year. And he went into the Aquarius house from April to June, and then he went backwards. So we know that it's going to be the Aquarius house is what one of the big ones for you, set that cusp. And then we want to look at where the planets are transiting. So Saturn's between Capricorn and Aquarius, but next year he's going to be in Aquarius house. So that's where he's going to live, whatever that house is. And then Uranus, of course, is hanging out in Taurus, which he went into in March of 19 with a bang. And he said it was a little smidgy in there in the summer of 18, just a smidgy. But he's in there for a bang for 8 years. So Uranus, of course, is an 8-year transit. Saturn is a 29-year, but he spends 2.5 years in a sign. So we know we're going to be relating the Taurus house to the Aquarius house by the planets in the sky, but we're also going to be relating them back to wherever they live natally in your chart by sign and house. And we already know that you're having all this disturbance in your Capricorn house and your Aquarius house because that's where the planets have been hanging out for this year, the Capricorn, the COVID clump. And the Taurus house, Uranus has been down there doing its thing in the Taurus house. Then you're going to observe the aspect type, which we're going to do now in the presentation to see the interaction and tell the story. Now, of course, what we're having here is something called the closing square. You know, that we take the slower moving planet, which is Uranus, and we see where the faster moving planet is. So it's in Taurus. Saturn's going to be in Taurus. So he's going to go through Pisces, Aries, and then Taurus and meet up. So we know he's in closing square phase. So that means that we've already had a pretty long story running and we're in the wrap up. Now, if you're old, anybody born before 88 when these guys met up and started this cycle, you guys are going to have a different story than anybody born since 88. And I did see some younger faces here. So, but you do want to know, like, what's the relationship that my Saturn and Uranus have based on where they are in my natal chart? Like, what's their story? And then we go back to when Saturn and Uranus met, and we basically apply lunar phases to it. Now, what I'm going to do is the Ptolemaic aspects, which are the big five: the opposition, the conjunction, the trine, the sextile, and the square. But I totally encourage you to add in your own work your quintiles, your semi-sextiles, your sesquiquadrates, because they all work too. But again, I only have an hour and miles to go before we sleep. All right, so we're going to go back to 88 because this closing sextile that we have, the closing square we have next year 3 times, started in 88. And that one was at, oh my goodness, where this eclipse is in your chart, right? That eclipse that we have in the sky. It was at 2827 of Sag on the galactic center on the world point. So in your own life, think about what was going on in your world from February of 88 to October of 88. That was when you started a new cycle. And if you're younger than that, just ask your parents, but you have a cycle, you're in that cycle that began in 88. For us older than 88, you should know what happened in your life in February and October, because Saturn and Uranus got together in Sagittarius and they began a journey. Opening conjunction starts a new story. So if we look at the chart, this is the conjunction for Europe. A lot of energy in the second house. The conjunction itself took place in the second house in Sagittarius on the world point. That was conjunction 1. And again, you'll get a copy of these slides so you can apply them to your own. You can see there's a nice big juicy mystic rectangle there in 88. And so that was the Winter Games in Calgary. I've included images of anybody in the anybody in your Commonwealth, whatever you call it, the bigger, wider group, Canada, Australia, and the other guys, Falkland Islands. So here we had the Calgary Games in February. And then we had conjunction 2, which was the climate scientist James Hansen testified about global warming. And we also had the BBC program On the Record debuted on September 18th of 88. We also had British Margaret Thatcher declaring her opposition to European collectivism, which was before the EU happened, but Margaret was in there going, whatever. So I'm going to guess this is probably when you went to the war in the Falkland Islands too, because I know it was when she was running place. And of course, Belgium is where the EU is located. And then in conjunction 3, which happened October 18th of 88, which of course then this is the conjunction, the 1, 2, 3 sets the story. So we're seeing No Europe Collective, a TV show that probably is pretty, I don't know what it is, but I'm going to assume you guys do. Global warming and the community energy of the Olympics, that we're all a global community. So we see that as the conjunction. And then here on conjunction 3, again at 27, 28. Now this is where your chart has, the eclipse has stuff, right? So we know that this chart is getting triggered. So you want to kind of blend these stories. Whatever happens on this eclipse is your Uranus stuff. So we see this eclipse and we see it at Capricorn rising, moon in the 1st, Capricorn moon, solid, reliable, dependable, in a square to the sun, and what your positions are in the world and where you're going. And the sun rules the 7th, moon, of course, rules the 7th. So the sun and moon you're in a little bit of an argument about how to appear to the outside world. Scorpio midheaven answering to Mars on the world point retrograde. We are going to retreat a little bit from the world, go back to what was happening at the beginning of July when Mars went into Aries, because he's part of this story too. But we're going to be retreating a little, Mars retrograde, from our role as the boss. We're kind of going, I'm not into this collective stuff. I'm going my own way. And of course, in the UK, it bans the broadcast of voices of person associated with Sinn Féin or the IRA, which of course was the time of the Troubles. Then we have the opening, and of course all the other things too, because they're all kind of seated on this conjunction. So we then watch them unfold from 88 to now, closing square, where we're doing closing squares, of course, are the psychological integrations. We go to the opening sextile, which happened between 96 and 97, May of 96, March of 97, and these all took place in early Aries. So the sextiles are easy. It's Aries, Aquarius. Saturn's in Aries, Uranus is in Aquarius. That first one was, of course, in Capricorn. So notice where the 0 Aries is in your chart, 0 to 6, and notice where the Aquarius is, because Uranus was there, and it's a sextile. It's easy. It's fire and air. It's what am I communicating? What am I going to go do? I have this great idea, right? So May 10th and 11th, an unexpected storm on Mount Everest took the lives of 8 climbers, and they were from your country. Princess Di and Charles, their divorce was completed then. Sextile. They got through it. They changed it. They shifted it. There also were 2 passenger planes colliding in India, very Saturn Uranus, but everybody lived. Opening square, 99, and I gave India because, you know, you had used to run it. 99 to 2000, now we have a square. Now this is an action-oriented thing. Whenever we have an opening square, we're action-oriented, we're taking action, we need to do something. Saturn's in Taurus, which is where Uranus is going to be next year, or where Uranus is now, but he's going to be hanging out in here. And Uranus was in Aquarius. So we're having a little reversal, opening square, closing square. We're going to see the energy kind of dance. We're back to 99, July of 99 to May of 2000. And so the images from then, where the lunar prospector completes its mission, has crashed into the moon. How to vote yes, the preamble for Australia deciding if they're going to stay in the Commonwealth rather than establishing a public. And that happened in November of 99 under this opening square of how am I going to take, remember, opening squares are always like opening new moon squares. You have to take action. You have to do something. You have to think about, do I want to do it? And then also May Day, the anti-capitalist protest in London erupted into violence. So where people were really complaining about capitalism, which of course now we have Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter in the capitalism energy. We're all kind of working with that in a new way. Then we go to the opening trine. Again, to your chart, what happened between 2002 and 2003, August of 2002, June of 2003. Now we're working with Gemini, air for Saturn, 2 ways of seeing things, 2 ways of thinking about things, and Uranus and Aquarius working for the greater good of the group. Of course, this was after the 9/11 stuff had happened, so there was a whole big thing about, you know, how we're going to work with this and whatever, but also in your world, what was the air idea? What were the ideas about change? What was the split? Saturn and Gemini's 2 sides to the story. I like this, you like that. What happened in 2002, in between August and June of 2003? This is a little bit longer, but it is a trine, and you can see it dances in Gemini and Aquarius. And then the closing trine is down at 0, Cancer and Pisces, which gives us like a ripening and a fruiting of the energy. And again, you're going to get a copy of these slides. You can pull these charts and lay them out in your, lay them out against yours, because you're going to then see how you've been evolving since that conjunction happened. So the opening trine was the UN World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg. It also was the BBC program On the Record concluded. It also was Vladimir Putin was the first visit of a Russian head of state to visit the UK since 1874. Okay, so trine, cooperating, and of course it's Gemini Aquarius, I'm cooperating with my neighbors, or I'm talking to my friends, or I'm talking to other people that I haven't really talked to. The opposition between 208 and 210, there were 5 of them. So November of 08 to July of 2010, we see Barack Obama was elected as the first vice president of the United States, Black president. We also had the swine flu happen with the pandemic that lasted until August. We also had the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom opened on July 1st of 09. We also had the volcano erupted that grounded flights through Europe. And we also had WikiLeaks publishing classified information. So that was the opposition, the struggle, the fight. How do we look at things? And of course, it was between Virgo and Pisces. Of course, Pisces is traditionally the sign of slavery. Virgo is the sign of work, where we're going. And then the Libra, Aries, the struggle, the argument, the fight, and the direction. Closing trine. Now we're in harvesting mode, where this is basically, it's kind of got a Sagittarian feel because it's a closing positive energy. And that ran from 216 to 217, and that was in Sagittarius. And then the positions of Uranus are wrong. I don't know why they're wrong like that, but they are. It should not be, it should be Gemini, or Aries, should be Aries, not Sagittarius, Cancer. Sorry about that. So we have this closing trine energy, which is an off-duty Turkish officer assassinated the Russian ambassador. A suicide bombing in the Manchester Arena after the concert. Sometimes trines are bad. This is a fire trine. So, and then the fire breaking out at the Grenfell Tower in London. Meghan and Harry announcing their engagement. Closing square 2021. This is the one we're going to be working with. So there's one on February 17th, one on June 14th, and one on December of next year, December 24th. So the first one up is right after Valentine's Day, and this is running between Aquarius and Taurus. So here's the first chart. Cast for London. This is the closing square. Now we're psychologically closing whatever the opening story was that we had back in Capricorn with Thatcher, and we see that the Saturn is in the 5th house and Uranus is in the 8th. So the 8th house has a lot to do with my taxes, my money from other people. Obviously, we're coming out of a pandemic, the economic stuff. It's an angular chart. The nodes of fate are angular. North node in Gemini, South node in Sag, South node on the marriage planet. I'm going my own way. So when you kind of want to talk, when your family members go, what's going on with that Brexit thing? Vesta on the ascendant in, a trine here, or I'm sorry, in an adjusting energy to the moon in Aquarius. All these planets about going, and of course, Sun at the last degree. But this one is at 7, and it also squares the moon in Taurus. Saturn is going to be squaring the moon in this aspect. And remember, in Prince Charles' chart, his mama's got a moon in Taurus. He's described with the moon in Taurus at the top of the chart. So this could be some energy with the Queen, too, on the closing square, because we do know it's tied to leadership, right? Moon square Saturn here. We also see a lot of energy around the 5th house and the 6th house, changes in the daily routines of folks, daily understanding of where they're going. It is a Mars-Pluto trine, so that's actually helpful. And then there's Neptune on the descendant, so it's emotional. And this is the chart against you guys there. Then the second one, which is going to be June, we see, again, it's a bold chart, and this last one was a bold chart too, with Vesta as the handle. Here we see a lot of energy around the direction we're heading, houses 1, 2, 3, what that news story looks like. And again, this is a psychological, closing squares or psychological integrating what we're doing. So all the stuff we've been going through with COVID, a lot of people are saying June, July, we start to get that we figure it out, or maybe the vaccine's released, or maybe enough people have it that we've figured out our coping mechanisms. Because part of the thing that people, at least here in the United States, because we have a guy who's made it very political, don't wear a mask because it's not macho. One of the things that, it is you want to get it slowly so that not everybody gets it at once, so you don't overwhelm the healthcare systems, right? So it's not like everybody's not going to catch it or be exposed to it. That's what happens eventually. But not like in a big clump so everybody dies at the same time. You want to kind of phase it, for lack of a better word. So this to me feels like, okay, we're starting to open up stuff. We're starting to change some of our structures. We see that the angles match the UK chart. It's Capricorn midheaven, which I didn't put it against your chart because I only had an hour, but that this chart is very much about, okay, what are the actions I'm taking now on that June chart? And that's June 10th, cast for London. And here we also have a big focus with the sun on ruling the 7th. And again, moon in Leo on the world point. So whatever it is, you guys are going to be very well known in the world for this closing square, for the actions you take around the structures of because it's all on your angles, it's your nodal stuff. It also is moon in Leo in your 5th house, your natal chart's 5th house of creativity, that 5th house of the royal, the queen, having a lot of royal energy, but also a lot of energy about how we relate to the outside world. Then the next one, which is the December 24th next year, this is the last square, and this is at 11 of Aquarius Taurus. And again, psychologically integrating, figuring out what we're going to do. Saturn is moving out of the Aquarius decant into the Gemini decant. Aquarius is the group, and then we go into the Gemini, we go into the kids. So we see a structural change here. Again, very focused on what action you guys are going to take in the world if we apply it to your land, but also in your own charts, look at where you have the psychological closing integration of the work you've been doing since 1988. Your journey as a country, your journey in the world. Back then, Margaret Thatcher says, I don't like this collectivism stuff. This to me says you kind of figure it out. Like we're going to join, but we're not going to stay. But it also is very strong. We have Venus retrograde here next to Pluto. So there's a lot of energy around the economics of the country and where you're going. It's also aspecting the moon up here in Leo at the last degree. It is a void moon, so it does kind of suggest that the energy is deeply creative, even if it's not 100% sure. I think the action gets taken in this one, the one in June, and then because in June we see that the Uranus is direct and the Saturn is retrograde, so we know we're going to be going forward, and Saturn's like, I don't know that I wanna. And then here, Saturn's going direct and Uranus is going retrograde, saying, yes, you're going to do this. It's okay. We can move forward. It does look Venus at the top of the chart. Again, these are the US, I'm sorry, not the US. These are the UK angles. I should have done the UK chart because that's your 23-degree rising. And I said, watch that. You're going to have Eris down here at the very bottom, poking into your ascendant. So it's the country taking a stand for its own vision of what it wants. And of course, the Eris-Pluto square, the last one is in November, and Pluto has pulled away. Last one's in October of next year. Pluto has pulled away from Eris. So whatever the dissension is that's going on in the country that's been really amped up with the Uranus Eris, which was the leaving, that was your vote to leave Brexit. And this is now like, okay, now we're gonna do something else. Saturn, and Aries, yeah. So now we have this new energy about how do we get into this new structure. So it's important, and it's coming up with your vision of where you're going, and that's the closing square. And then coming up after that on the closing sextile, which is the harvesting of the work that's been done, that happens in April of 25 through January of 26. And then the last one is the closing conjunction, which is the position that takes place when we get to 28 Gemini, which is opposite the full moon eclipse that we're having now, but it's at the 28 Gemini axis energy. So we begin a new cycle in 2032 around how we proceed with this closing energy. Books referenced in this are used with the mundane cycles, the Campion Bagnett Harvey book and the Benson Brobert. I love that book. You should get it. The Faded Sky. He did this whole history of astrology. It makes you really proud to be an astrologer. And then, of course, Nick's Book of World Horoscopes, which I looked at and then I went, I'm just going to write one of my British friends and get the right thing. And then Bernadette Brady, The Eagle and Lark, a predictive astrology book by Samuel Weiser. So that's a bibliography. So that's it. And my timer just went off, so I did my hour. And I got through all the slides. I was kind of like, I hope I can get through them all. But what I want you to do is take these closing sextile, closing squares, and then go back through the earlier times. Remember, 1 is get ready, 2 is see what you need to do, 3 is go. And so this is a very, very potently tied to the UK chart because we have the Aries, IC, Libra, rise, midheaven. And then in this one, we got the Capricorn and the Cancer. And then in this one, we have the nodes, angular. So this is this closing square is really big for you in terms of how you're going to structurally Saturn change how you relate to the world, how you're going to psychologically adapt, how you're going to change to the world and what it looks like. And so I just encourage you to have fun with it, Any questions?
That was just absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much.